I'll riff on this because you mentioned before that you might ask me why in the world people should listen to a pastor, right? We're political people. Why should we listen to a pastor? Well, one reason is because secularism is absolutely dead and it's not working. And so take your pick, buddy. Like, do you want the dissolving of your civilization, or do you want to come back to some form of Christianity informing your national life, your civil life? Okay, if you don't have the triune God informing what you're doing, then you are going to be lost. You're going to fall apart.
Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Nick Solheim. I am the COO of American Moment, and I'm super glad that you have joined us for another episode. This week, we had a conversation with Pastor Jared Longshore from Moscow, Idaho. And before you freak out and think, oh, man, why have they brought another pastor on to talk about politics? I asked him that very question, and he had a very engaging and encouraging answer as to why you should be listening to pastors working in the political realm. But before I get to all of that and introduce Jared, I do just want to flag that we have the entire backlog of this podcast on our website at AmericanMoment.org. You can also find a bunch of other cool things on there, videos for past events we've done, applications to our programs, more information about who we are, what we do, why we do it, and pictures of all of our ugly mugs. So please do go and check that out. We also do have a bonus episode to this podcast where we talked about playing football and whether it was just to drop the atomic bomb on Japan. So do go ahead and sign up for that on YouTube. You can be either a truther or a statesman, and you get access to the episode a week early, as well as access to these special bonus episodes that we do. So do make sure to go check that out. We had on Pastor Jared Longshore from Moscow, Idaho today. He is a minister at Christ Church and is also a Fellow of Theology and Undergraduate Dean at New St. Andrews College. I really recommend that you either play this episode in the car or listen to it with headphones in. Jared has like the deepest voice with like Southern drawl accent. He's truly a joy to listen to. I certainly like listening to all of his podcast appearances, not just for his voice, but also for the smart things that he says. So we will go now to Pastor Jared Longshore. Jared, thanks for coming on the pod.
Thanks for having me on the pod.
So we're gonna start where we always start with all of our guests, though you have a bit more of a heterodox background than most of our guests do. And I'm going to ask the question that a lot of people are probably thinking, listening to this right now. Who the heck is Jared Longshore?
Yes. So my name is Jared Longshore, and I am married to my wife, Heather. We have 7 children. The oldest is 14. The youngest is 4. And we live in Moscow, Idaho, where I'm a minister at Christ Church. And I'm also the dean of New St. Andrews College. I'm also a fellow of theology at New St. Andrews College and have been out there for about 2.5 years. So a born and raised Floridian who decided to up and move all the way across the country to Moscow, Idaho, which probably warrants the question, why in the world did you do that? And I did that because obviously our civilization is falling apart and we need to find stuff. And there was a lot of good things happening in Moscow, Idaho. Practically, I was a minister for like 17 years. So I think 17 to 19 years or something. I've been a pastor, and was in Southwest Florida most recently. We were there for about 17 years of our lives, and doing wonderful things there. We were friends with the guys out in Moscow, Idaho, and there's quite a community out there. The town is small. It's up in northern Idaho. It's about 25,000 people. The University of Idaho is there, right across the border, Washington-Idaho border. I mean, it's 15 minutes from my house is Pullman, Washington, which is where Washington State University is. So you have 2 major universities right there in a very kind of small locale. and a flourishing Christian community there with liberal arts and humanities college, which is, of course, is the college I mentioned, New St. Andrews College, and just tons and tons of Christians. Lots of good business going on. Aaron Renn has spoken about this in his recent book, Life in Negative World, talking about Moscow and the ownership that's happening there. A lot of Christians buying up places in town, a lot of businesses starting right on Main Street in downtown Moscow. And I was well suited to help. So I could go out there and be a minister, could go out there and serve that college. And so we decided to move the whole family out to Moscow, Idaho.
So Moscow has had this very, I would say, outsized impact on particularly like Christian culture in the United States. I mean, Pastor Wilson was recently on Tucker Carlson, right? Like preaching. What was it that I texted him the other day? He did Charlie Kirk. I think I told him he preached some red hot gospel. So you guys have, and obviously the resistance during all the COVID tyranny as well. You guys have sort of developed an outsized impact. But from what I've heard, I've had a lot of little birdies tell me that Jared Longshore was a big deal before he moved to Moscow. So tell me a little bit about your time and some of the battles you were involved in when you were still in Baptist world.
Okay, still in Baptist world, yes. Also, you've let the cat out of the bag that I went from being a what we call a Reformed Baptist minister. So Baptists, basically America's Baptists. I actually looked at Congress recently. It was 86%, 85% of our congressmen are Christians, majority Protestant. And then you can break it down beyond that. But at any rate, America's a very Baptist place. I was a Reformed Baptist, which means I was more friendly with guys like John Calvin, Martin Luther, and such. Although I just saw Lutheran Reformation Church right around the corner with its LGBTQ flag. Yeah. So there you go.
I'm sure he would have loved that.
Yeah. Right adjacent to the Library of Congress. But I was in the SBC world, Southern Baptist Convention. Southern Baptist Convention is very big, 50,000 churches. I don't know how many million, 13 million people or something like that. If you are established as the president of Southern Baptist Convention, you're going to be in the White House and whatnot. So it's got the ERLC, the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, which is sadly often doing silly things. Yeah. So I was in that kind of world and went to Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. And did a master's there, did a PhD there, pastored. There you go. I was involved in all of that. Yeah. And I guess I wrote a book, I don't know how many years ago that is now, called, what was the name of it? Strong and Courageous, Following Jesus Amid the Rise of America's New Religion. And I was becoming increasingly convinced that secularism was dead and it was dying, and you need some kind of God to establish your civil order. If it's not grounded upon some kind of ultimate reality, then you're lost. And that reality was shifting from some kind of secular humanistic rationalism to out-and-out neo-paganism, like this weird worship of the creature, which is talked about in Romans 1. And so wrote that book kind of having lights turned on. This was amid the George Floyd riots. And, of course, in the wake of that came COVID. But it was becoming increasingly apparent through intersectionality and all the woke ideologies that our nation was losing its mind. And I said, well, as I looked around, it was clear that Moscow had something different, had different ingredients that were then producing a different way of life. And there's lots of different routes conservatives are taking at the moment. One is they're like saying, let's go find a little cottage somewhere out in the woods. Yeah. Me and you, babe.
The Benedict option.
Let's do the Benedict option. Yeah. Cottage core. Let's go full cottage core. I don't know if you're familiar with this particular.
Yeah. We're gonna read our Wendell Berry in our little cabin off the grid.
We're gonna do that. I'm gonna get an old plow and I'm gonna work the field. Yeah. So you have that kind of thing. Obviously, you have a lot of conservatives. We're here in D.C. You have a lot of people that are still saying, okay, we're just going to keep plodding away and working here, and God will bring some kind of renewal. But the thing is, if you either one of those routes, so let's go big and do the D.C. thing. Let's go private. It's not going to work without a without a fundamental change. So this is where Doug was saying on Tucker Carlson that we don't have a political solution, meaning we actually do have to have new hearts. This isn't going to work without new hearts. And that's a hard concept to get across, particularly to politically minded people.
Right.
Okay. And coming from the SBC, it's quite a political place. I once knew a guy that came to work in DC, and he didn't have any kind of politics on his resume, but he had spent like a decade or so in the SBC. And the guy said, you don't have the credentials. And he goes, oh yeah, you don't know the SBC. I have the credentials. And so it's you want to manage it and structure it and work the system and all of that's good. But at the end of the day, it's not only new hearts, but then it's actually a new way of thinking and ordering your civilization, which that conversation's connected. I mean, Doug went on Tucker to talk about Christian nationalism. Like, what is it? Like, what are you even talking about? So what you're seeing in Moscow is well-ordered families, church at the center of town, the worship of the triune God that is impacting education. There's now probably 650 kids that go to a K through 12 classical Christian college. New St. Andrews College has about 300 students now, more than we can take every freshman. Now, the freshmen incoming are more than we have the capacity for at the moment.
Yeah.
So there's lots and lots of pressure on this particular way of life. When I moved in, it was strange. It was going back to things that you read about in books. I had our children have tons and tons of friends. You can foot traffic around town everywhere. You got kids knocking on the door. Can your son come out and play? Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And it's a radically different way of life than I think the majority of majority of Americans are living. And it wasn't. While it requires a new heart, a fundamental change, there's also a plan for it. There's certain ingredients that are going to produce that kind of recipe.
Well, and the thing that's super interesting to me about it, having been out there a couple times now, is, again, like, I just keep coming back to this outsized impact that you guys have, right? Like, you say, you have a couple hundred students at this school, a couple hundred at the university, and some of our listeners might think like, so, whatever. There are a lot of schools with a lot of students in many different places, but what a lot of those places don't have is like, the output of books and talks and podcasts and apps that are like actively reforming Christians and I would say even people who are becoming Christians because of this content. I'm truly amazed by the outsized impact.
Yeah. But I could also hear them say, hey, they've got that too. I mean, We're on a podcast right now. I guarantee there's podcasts here on Capitol Hill that we can find. I'm sure there are plenty of those. And there are driven people everywhere I've walked around. It's been young people running, more young people running, either running with their earbuds in or walking around in their suits with their earbuds in. Yeah. This is a very driven type A kind of place. And that's great. But there's something more that's missing. And it really is, it's the covenant, which is why I wrote the book, The Case for the Christian Family. I think it was The Case for the Christian Family. What did I say? The covenantal solution to the dissolving American family. Right. Now, that's weird. If you got political people here listening to this podcast, you're like, okay, what are we talking about? The Solemn League and Covenant, right? This covenant idea, of course, is quite intimately related to our politics and to the way we should structure ourselves as a society. And it's entirely lost. So it's entirely contractual now, individualistic and contractual, very Rousseauian. This is where we're living now. And even the conservatives live in that world. And the idea that you're going to have a community. So you have the church at the center of the town. OK, but it's not just a symbol. OK, the church at the middle of the town is not just a symbol. This is where I think people they're like, oh, there's still quaint conservatives that would love to live in that place. Like, yeah, give me the place with the church in the middle of town. I'd like to hear the church bell. Mm-hmm. Well, good. You should want to hear the church bell. But that is an outpost of God's dealings with man on earth. People that have covenanted with him and then go out and live in a particular society in particular ways that are intimately related to that church. Okay, so there's a distinction between the church and the state, but it's not an out and out dichotomy. It's not this radical separation. You actually have this communal life Okay, you have covenant families, and then you have people that have covenanted with the Lord, right? You have a covenant church. You go to the covenant worship, and that's going to start to have its ramifications upon your society and the way that you're structured. And it's life-giving. It's got a certain ethos to it that is markedly different than what's happening in other places.
Yeah, that was such a good. I was going to talk about this book later in the episode, but that was such a great segue that we'll just go to it right now. I'm really interested to hear a bit more about that and to hear you talk about what is wrong with. I'm interested in kind of two different categories, right? Like I'm interested in what's going wrong with the American family right now, but I also think there's a similar issue plaguing Christian families, right? Like you look at, birth rates in the United States, we're far below where we used to be in the amount of children we have. Divorce is on the rise, and it can be very, simply said that, well, it's because, people don't go to church, they don't, covenant with God every week, et cetera. But go a little deeper than that.
Okay.
Say more about it.
We're in an absolute hot mess, which isn't hard to, that's not saying anything that people don't already know if they're paying attention.
Yeah.
But it's got a long story. We, in the book of Hebrews in the Bible, at least the King James Version talks about people not being bastards, but being sons. So that old word bastard, being fatherless, that idea that I don't have a father. An illegitimate son, that used to be a category that people would think about and understand, right? What does it actually mean? Well, it actually meant to be born out of wedlock, okay? Which is not what you'd think. In our society, we would think, well, it'd be a guy that, maybe you were born and your dad died or something like that. Well, no, that wasn't what it was at all. No, it was being born out of wedlock, which would imply that there was no father, there was no head, right? You came from your mother, you had a mother, but the father's not around. It's not just a matter of him not being around, it's that you were actually born out of wedlock. So you're not going to be able to have any kind of restoration of family if you're not going to have a restoration of marriage. And so Obergefell basically has to go. So we can go over there and maybe deal with that after our podcast and talk to some people. It absolutely has to go, or it's going to absolutely destroy the American family. And Obergefell has come about because we have already lost the concept of what a family actually is. So I believe there was a Pew Research pull out recently. It said like 40% of Americans are essentially bastards. 40% of the children being born are being born out of wedlock, and you're gonna have problems. You're gonna have big problems in the way that you're structured as a society. An interesting case. This was post Obergefell. So an interesting Supreme Court case was Pavin v. Smith. Maybe kind of get into the covenantal idea through Pavin. Coming out of Arkansas. Arkansas had a code that said basically if let's say we have Jack and Jill. Jack and Jill are married. If a baby popped up in Jill's womb, Jack's the father. That's the presumption of the law. That's everyone's expectation. Jack's the father. If you come to find out that it was a case of adultery, right? I would say, well, who's the father? If you had Jack married Jill, right, and then all of a sudden you find Bob, right? Bob has intruded. He has entered into this union. He's slept with Jill. Jill's slept with him, and Jill's now pregnant with a child. Who's the father? Well, look, we're the generation that, we grew up on those talk shows and whatnot. It's like, hey, come back after the break. We'll tell you who the father is. We've got the paternity test in the back.
Yeah.
And whoever checks out on the paternity test in our little Scientology, our little, whoever checks out scientism, that's the person that's the father. Well, that's not historically the way it shook out. Right. And that's not even the way it shook out in you had wedlock principles present in Pavin v. Smith. So what was really interesting is you had an Arkansas law that said basically if a woman became pregnant, we're going to have the presumption that it's going to be that the father the husband is the father. Therefore, when artificial reproductive technologies come in and she becomes pregnant by artificial reproductive technologies, when she's listed as the mother, and who's listed as the father now? Well, Arkansas code said the husband is the father. The only way, in fact, that, say, back to Bob, that Bob could get paternity rights is if Jack signed off. Okay? If Jack doesn't sign off, the child's mine. There you go. Now, Christians, we have theology of divorce and remarriage, and when that is permissible and when that's not permissible. And it would be permissible in cases of adultery. So Jack could put his wife away. He could divorce her lawfully, we'd say. But if he chose not to, we'd say, no, he has paternal rights, right? Now, Bob is going to have to supply something because he's done violence here. So he's going to owe something, but he's not going to have headship or authority. That is Jack's unless he releases it.
Right.
That's the structure. In Pavitt v. Smith, you had two women who were in a lesbian relationship, one of whom became pregnant because of artificial reproductive technologies. And then the lesbian partner said, I want to be listed as a parent. And Arkansas said, nothing doing. We're not going to do it. So the woman, right, who gave birth to the child, who supplied the egg, she can, but Arkansas was saying, we're not going to do this. Well, they pressed, and they went all the way up to the Supreme Court, Pavitt v. Smith, and they looked at it, and they said, Arkansas, you have this code that says, essentially, if Jill becomes pregnant, even if Jack is not the biological father, he can be listed as the father on the birth certificate because you're giving these old school wedlock rights to that father. Mm-hmm. And then they sunk on the hook and they said, look at Obergefell. We have said that this lesbian couple has every single right of marriage that you do, that heterosexual couples have. And if you're going to do it for Jack, then you have to do it for this case of Pavitt v. Smith. And so you're in this wild, basically our bad ideas are showing how society itself is being restructured and reordered. So the covenant idea is, last time you went to a wedding, but if you go to a wedding, the minister
Saturday.
There you go. Well, you probably heard this, right? So my wife's name is Heather. So the traditional statement said by the minister at a wedding is, I now present to you for the very first time, Mr. and Mrs. Jared Longshore. And you say, what? What? What kind of misogynistic minister is that? Or you start to feel, did he mess up the liturgy? Did he forget her name? Why did he say, for you, it was Mr. and Mrs. Nick Solheim. And you say, excuse me, is she not present anymore? Well, traditionally you say, oh, she's very much present, right? It's a head and a body relationship. The two have become one. That's the idea. You have this entity that now exists that did not exist before. Okay. So if you have Jack Thompson and Jill Williams, right, you have two persons coming down, but after the ceremony and the consummation of the marriage, you have one new thing, mm-hmm. The Thompsons. And of course you could think back politically, that used to mean something, right? It used to mean something in the way that we vote. It used to mean something in the way that you organize your society. You organized it around this idea of covenanted families. That was not, now, of course, we always appreciated the individual, but it wasn't just strictly and radically individual. We understood that there were these other corporate realities that come into play. And this is not like a new idea, and it wasn't one even that we conjured up in this great nation in which we live. It comes even back further in the stream of what a nation is and how it's constituted, and particularly how families are constituted. That's a very real thing. The Thompsons now exist. And I'll riff on this because you mentioned before that you might ask me why in the world people should listen to a pastor, right? We're political people. Why should we listen to a pastor? Well, one reason is because secularism is absolutely dead and it's not working. And so take your pick, buddy. Do you want the dissolving of your civilization, or do you want to come back to some form of Christianity informing your national life, your civil life? Okay. If you don't have the triune God informing what you're doing, then you are going to be lost. You're going to fall apart. He is the organizing principle. He's the unifying principle. And so, for example, back to Jack Thompson and Jill Williams, say I present to you for the very first time Mr. and Mrs. Jack Thompson. Okay? And they get halfway down the aisle, and Jack looks back at me and goes, "Just kidding. Didn't mean it." Now, after he's subsequently slapped by Jill, and this was a bad situation, right? Bad situation. What do I say? What do I say as a minister? Or what do his friends say? What do the witnesses say? You know what they say? Too bad. It actually didn't matter. The Thompsons that now exist are not simply the fabrication of your will, of some kind of human social contract into which you entered, as if it's rendered null and void because you didn't really mean it, as if it's rendered null and void because your will is now different than it was. No, you were bonded by God himself. So, for example, let's say you and I enter into a business agreement, right? I'm going to supply you 1,000 airplanes, and you're going to,
sweet,
yeah, and you're going to buy them for $1 million.
This is also a good deal for you.
We shake. I don't know how much 1,000 airplanes cost. We shake hands, sign the contract, right? 2 days later, you have a rich uncle that gifts you 100 airplanes or 1,000, whatever many I was going to give you, and you don't need them. You don't need my airplanes anymore, and my airplane manufacturing plant burns down overnight. I can't supply it.
It's a very unfortunate day.
It's a bad day for me. It's a good day for you. Either way, you don't need the contract anymore. I can't fulfill the contract anymore. Can we come back 2 days later, 3 days later, shake hands, call it off without harm, without foul, without sin, without wrongdoing? Can we do that? And the answer is, of course we can. And we just know instinctively that's not a problem. Contract's done, right? Okay, Jack and Jill, 3 days into the honeymoon, they just decide, it's not working out. It's not working out for me. It's not working out for you. Can they come together, shake hands, call it off? No harm, no foul, no sin, no disorder introduced into the world. And the answer is, you can't. Like we still have this. It's vague, but we can pull on it. Somebody goes, "Yeah, I don't feel so good about that one." Why not? If God's not involved, if you have nothing to hear from the church and from ministers of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and if there's no God above us, like whatever it is. If there's, imagine there's no heaven, it's easy if you try, no hell below us, above us only sky. If you want to go the John Lennon route, then why in the world would you object to that? Well, it's sacred. There's something that's still in it, like a Richard Dawkins situation. I kind of like cultural Christianity, even though I don't like the real thing. Well, no, see, you're not coming back from the road you're on unless you come back to the real thing.
Yeah. So do you think people aren't getting married just because they don't value it as much anymore? Or like what? Because the marriage rates are like through the floor. Like,
yeah, they're not getting married because of porn.
Yeah, that's the take.
One, yeah.
We'll keep going.
Well, the guys are looking at porn, so that's what they're doing. And there's several. We could build on this particular thesis, though. Porn is probably our key problem. Society itself isn't structured to incentivize marriage the way I just talked about, right? Think about it for a minute. Think about the Jack, Jill, and Bob situation. Okay, imagine we could go to Bob before he's about to go sleep with Jill and warn him. Say, you understand that if you do this, another man might raise your seed, harvest your crop. You sure you want to do that? Men don't like that. They don't like that. Okay. Now, if they're just debauched and whatever, but you get like Bob, that would draw him up short. You mean if I go and do that, like I wouldn't have rights over the education of my daughter or my son, right? Over his or her welfare, but this other guy would? Yeah. Well, that's a wedlock principle. That's going back to an understanding of a structure of marriage and society where the idea of getting married, men getting married, it's a patriarchal kind of idea, right? This idea of father rule would have benefit and therefore reason for entering into that particular institution, but it's not incentivized anymore. And so why would you be as interested in getting into it?
So what does incentivizing look like to you?
Well, we have to take baby steps.
Okay.
We don't want to shock anybody's system. Who was it? Is it Michelle Millett? I think it was Michelle Millett in the 1960s during the second wave of feminism and the radical revolutions. Her sister came out talking about what she experienced at one of the events where the radical left was together. I think she was a homosexually active and all this, the Michelle Millett gal. And she said, we went into this kind of back and forth meeting of the revolutionaries. And they said, what are we here to do today? And they said, create revolution. What kind of revolution? The cultural revolution. How are we going to do that? By destroying the American family. How are we going to destroy the American family? By destroying the American patriarch. How are we going to destroy the American patriarch? By taking away his power. How are we going to do that? By destroying monogamy. How are we going to destroy monogamy? By promoting prostitution, homosexuality, all of the promiscuity, all of that stuff, which is why I'm saying porn is our problem. But there was a whole ideology to destroy the family behind the sexual revolution. Like, that's creepy to say, okay, you knew that if you wanted to create a revolution, what you had to do was destroy the power of the American patriarch.
It shows how powerful it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's the point. And it is powerful. And what makes it powerful? Monogamy. All right. What makes it? Proverbs 31 in the Bible talks about this godly woman, this woman who fears the Lord, right? The heart of her husband trusts in her and he shall have no lack of gain. Why? Because he does him good all the time and he knows it. And therefore he trusts her and therefore he loves her. You have this beautiful picture, right? Of what a good Christian marriage ought to be, like what the ideal is. But that revolution was intentional in order to bring about the kind of society that we have now. So you're going to have to start to build back patriarchy, right? And you're going to have to do that without being dumb. So there's probably, everybody knows, I think Aaron Renn wrote about this in his book, and I appreciate it. There's a lot of guys that are getting into the patriarchy movement, and they think it consists of having a big beard, smoking a cigar somewhere while not caring for your wife or your children, which is that's not the idea.
Two of those things are cool. The last one is not cool.
Right, yeah. Yes. Well, it's an immaturity, Yeah. So the vision, I'll just give you a picture of what happens in Moscow. You have a strong manhood culture in Moscow, and you have women who are flourishing and happy and cheerful and smart, right? And they know Latin and they know how to do sourdough, and they're lovely, right? And the guys are hardworking, entrepreneurial, brotherly in their fellowship and relationships. But in my household, this just means men are made to die. You have to die and you have to sacrifice. So you need to get up early. You need to go to bed late. I think a lot of what I would anticipate kind of DC staffers and hill types do, but it has to be reoriented back into the family.
Yeah.
Okay? Which if you're in this kind of high octane political environment, it's not conducive to that kind of thing, right? You have to say, no, you're going to find a place where you can live, where you can actually sacrifice for the welfare of your children. That means their education. And that means it's on your shoulders. So you husbands are the ones who have to lead, you have to provide, and you have to protect. Those are going to be the hallmarks of your life. You're leading your wife and your children, providing for your wife and your children, and you're protecting your wife and your children. And what is the woman doing? Well, she's helping. She's nurturing, right? She's beautifying, all of these things. If you get these categories back, if you just have, what's going to happen is the proof will be in the pudding. We'll get political moves later, but it's actually going to take healthy families. And when people see it, so what people come out to Moscow and they remark on this very thing, it's I've never seen so many healthy, happy families. And that's purely God's grace. That's his blessing, right? That can't be manufactured either. But there's a target. You're going to have to start aiming at that in order to see it have downstream consequences in our, say, civil dealings.
I'm going to put you out of your comfort zone when I ask this. What are those future policy solutions that you just referenced? Like down the line, you have what you want, you get a bunch of like hundreds of thousands of Christian families in the US, then what?
Yeah. Well, take abortion. We'll start at the very bottom of the barrel. Should a woman be allowed to kill her child without the father's permission? The answer would be manifestly no. And it's outrageous that it's the other way around. And then when you come to, I don't know if this is going all the way to policy or as political as you have it, but you have to say what particular jobs are suited toward each sex. And is it a thought crime or an actual crime to actually think it and then to live accordingly?
You're committing a thought crime right now.
I did this with Virginia Military Institute with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? Yeah. It's just remarkable. Like it's and of course you play the tape back, maybe hindsight's 20/20, and I don't know all the people that were involved in making the decisions, but I just love the pressure. Like, they're like, we want to send women. We think it's good for women to go to the military. And we think it's misogynistic that you would have an institution that's only for men. And we want women to come to the Virginia Military Institute. And there's like classic conservatives. You know what we'll do? We'll create the Women's Virginia Military Institute. We'll have a place for you. We'll train you to go to war and fight on the front lines, but we'll do it over here in this other building.
Yeah.
And then they're like, no, we will not. We don't want your Virginia Military Women's Institute. We want to come to the real thing. So women should not be fighting in the military. Women shouldn't be in combat in the military. It's absolutely outrageous. There was a commission from here in D.C. that went around maybe 3-4 years ago considering the viability of drafting women into the military. Like, have you lost your mind? Like, have you absolutely lost your mind? I have a professor friend from who served in Louisville, Kentucky, where I went to seminary, who sat before that commission, and he takes a newspaper and he just shows he's like, this newspaper has a grain. He's like, if I want that one there, I tear it and look, it's just a perfectly straight line because I'm with the grain, But if I come the other way, watch this, and it tears off to the side, jags off. And he says, the world has a grain. Like, there's a grain to the world, and that grain does not lend itself to women going into combat. Like, that's not what they're for. So you have that. There was a particular, I can't remember the case, but there was a particular outfit that basically said, we don't hire young mothers with children at this company. This is not what we do, right? Because, there's a young mother and there's children and whatnot. And that turned into another big case. I've asked the students before, I said, if you work in a coffee shop or whatever, and you have two candidates and they are both well suited to the job, right? They're both, they're in every conceivable way, they're identical, right? But one is a newly married young man and the other one is a newly married young woman who is pregnant with a child. Are you allowed to take into consideration the fact that she is indeed with child and newly married when you make your decision about who to hire?
Legally, no. But
legally, no. But does any person with his right mind say, well, of course you're going to be considering the different realities in those two cases, and the fact that it's outrageous to people to make that particular claim. Like, well, then we're obviously living in the kind of post-60s sexual revolution, the new constitution, new sexual constitution that's now been put in place. Yeah.
So there's been this pretty large movement in our policy areas here in DC. A lot of people talking about basically how you can incentivize marriage and childbirth. And they could be anything from, tax credits to direct cash payments to, any number of things, even like easing regulations to make it easier to buy cars that have like 7 seats, things like that.
I like to get a hotel. Sometimes you move like 9 souls, like I have. I've run into some difficulties trying to find a hotel to fit in.
Do you have to book like 3 hotel rooms to get it done? Or
there's a couple out there, but it's a little factor you have to work in. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, but I'm curious to hear like what you think about that, because a lot of this is not explicitly coming from a Christian perspective. It's just people who have common sense that realize this cliff we're driving off of is bad. So do you think that will be effective, or?
Yeah, well, we already do it. So, there's tax breaks for having kids. And I don't think that's a bad plan. So I think it's a good idea. And I don't actually know the logistics and how that would all shake down given the stat I cited earlier about 40% of children being born are illegitimate. I don't know how that shakes down actually with the tax credit. That would be very interesting to dig into.
Yeah.
And to say,
I'm going to do that after this.
Have we actually are we structuring our society covenantally and according to principles of righteousness, to principles of justice? So yes, we should. It's good for the nation to have people and to incentivize that particular thing. It's something we already do. It's something we should continue to do. Related to this would be, of course, the incentivizing of Christian ministers. So there's a long-standing policy that goes back before the founding of our nation where ministers get tax break for their home. Right? Let people find out about that and set their hair on fire.
Yeah.
And it goes back
to this Christian national?
Is this Christian national? Indeed. And it goes back to the parish idea. You'd have a minister right there next to the church. We're not going to tax the church property, and he lives on the church property. And then once you detached his home from the actual church property, what do you do then? When they said, no, we need to continue, because he's like a sacred thing. It's like this. He's kind of we understand he's in this realm that we shouldn't be touching. But then you have the question: well, are you gonna do that for the Unitarian Universalists? You can do that for Muslims, Buddhist priests. Where are you going to draw the line as a people? And the idea that we are not a historically Christian nation and therefore should be ordering these particular incentives, not merely based off of, say, some kind of human instinct, right? One of the things I'm going to be talking about at our event later today is the whole Jefferson Franklin we hold these truths to be self-evident. And I believe it was before that Jefferson had, we hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable. And I've heard that Franklin was suffering from gout when Jefferson said, hey, take a look, right? Take a look. We need Franklin in here and behind us. Take a look, and was it smells of the pulpit, strikes sacred and undeniable, puts in, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Well, you have to stay. If I'm asking the kind of questions that are going to make people that are merely thinking about things that are self-evident, right? Or is there actually a sacred and has that triune God who's all over the buildings? I've noticed here, everywhere I go, I keep seeing his name, right? He's on our buildings. He's on our money. Has he actually said anything to us about these particular policy decisions? Yeah. But you know what? I don't know that we should actually support the Unitarian Universalists, or I don't know that we should support the Muslims in the same way that we support the Christian ministers, right? Or I don't know that we should support this particular idea of just children. Hey, children, you get a tax break if you have a child. Yeah. Well, what would that do for Bob? Bob, we previously talked about, who has no concern for marriage, whatever. And he finds out that if he just goes and has a bunch of children and he doesn't take care of them, he's somehow going to be funded. Right. And then what constitutes, where are you drawing those particular lines? Yeah.
Well, speaking of this event tonight, we're hosting what will be a very interesting evening event with yourself, Senator Ron Johnson, and Dr. John Askinas on just war. So we're going to be going from family policy to to foreign policy. So, bit of a jump for you, but tell us a little bit about what you're planning, because this will release later, not today. Tell us a little bit about what you're planning on saying and how Christians should think about war, foreign policy, diplomacy, etc. Like really center this in on, like, there are a bunch of Christians that work on Capitol Hill in this particular area that listen to this show. What do you want to say to them?
Okay. I want to tell them that Christ is the Lord of war, or else you're going to have Lord of the Flies. There's no middle ground, no middle road. And I mean something very particular about that. So, a couple anecdotes. Tucker, and I don't remember where he was. It was right before he left Fox. Did one of the best rants I've ever seen. He was publicly somewhere. It's out on the internet. And Tucker says, he was just commenting. He's like, things have gone nuts. Things have gone absolutely nuts. He's like, when I got into this, we'd have debates. We could have conversations. He's like, now we're talking about mutilating children. And he's like, I think this is just, there's some really crazy stuff going on. And he's like, I think that it's spiritual. I think we need to stop and pray. And I was like, and then he's like, oh, look, I'm an Episcopalian. I'm like the worst Christian tradition there is. He was hilarious, but he's having, in a perfect way that makes sense to all of the America out there, just fit the bill for what Tucker's selling, is, oh my goodness, like this, there is something other going on here. And then, and Peterson has done that, right? And multiple times. I think it was on with Rogan. He said the Bible is the precondition to the manifestation of truth, right? He's having these kinds of, he's really beginning to see that if we're going to order our society and if we're going to consider our foreign policy, then we actually have to do something more than just the physical. We have to do something more than just the material, right? There has to be something more than just that which is self-evident going on. So the Christian tradition, you could dive in. I mean, it's not as if back in Augustine's day, he just popped out all of the principles of just war. That's not how it happened. He talked about just war, but didn't develop much of the principles. By the time of Aquinas, you have principles, and now that's even more thoroughly developed, right? So I want to start with the problem, the anecdotes, but then say, yes, there are principles involved. Principles for getting into war, should we go to war? Principles once we're in war, basically no punching below the belt, that kind of stuff. And principles for ending war, like what are we supposed to do? Who's going to pay for the building that we blew up? And whatnot, and how are we going to prosecute war crimes and all of that. And there's principles within each one of those, right? So you need to be a legitimate authority in order to go to war. So Uncle Bob, the plumber, can't declare war on North Korea. And, you might say, look, you don't know my Uncle Bob. Well, maybe, but he can't declare war on North Korea and be in accord with the principles of just war theory, that kind of thing. Once you're in war, one of the principles would be like proportional response. And so it wouldn't be just to take out 3 guys on a hill with an atom bomb, right? This is something that doesn't fit about that. And then principles for ending war, conciliation, some kind of treaty. It's the equivalent of like buying the other guy a beer, that kind of thing. And here's how we're going to move forward. Okay. You can look at all those principles, and there's more than that in each one of those 3 categories. And what I want to say at the end is, if you are honest with yourself, there are McDonald's food fights in the back of the minivan that you can't figure out if they're just or not. You've immediately come to the end of yourself when you're trying to figure out, was that a proportional response because there were 3 fries thrown, right? And then there's a cheeseburger, the chunk back. Was everything proportional, right? And have you made up? Do we have conciliation? And has this war ended in a just manner? And why is that? Well, the book of Proverbs, wisdom is speaking. Wisdom himself is speaking. And he says, by me kings reign. And then he says, I was with God in the beginning before the earth was formed. And you say, huh. Like, because if I just said it's by wisdom kings reign, that would play, wouldn't it? Yeah. And you think, well, I was walking down there, I saw a really smart guy. This guy has good chops. He knows his stuff. Okay. But then I said the wisdom by which kings reign was with God in the beginning, creating the world. And he's personified in the text. I mean, of course, this is Jesus Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. So you mean to tell me you can get wisdom without Jesus? You mean you can get the wisdom by which kings reign apart from Jesus? So let me just break it down. So I got my Pellegrino here. So this is Jesus. All the wisdom's in Jesus, by which kings reign, but you can get it out here somewhere just by perceiving the things which are self-evident. And you can identify the principles of just war and figure out whether we should actually support, Ukraine even more. So we send another $100 billion package. You can shake all of that down apart from any attention to the wisdom that is found in the one who is wisdom, through whom all things were made. And the answer is no, you can't. You can't. So you can take those little principles. So we want a just war thingamajig. Right? I can put all of the irrelevant data in on this side. It runs a mathematical equation and it pops out a just war response on the back end. And we want that because it's far easier to do that and claim that we're doing justice than to actually repent, to repent of our sins. Repenting of our sins is what we have to do, or else we're going to have our sons die on some foreign battlefield in a senseless war, right? When the secularist hears Christ is the Lord of war, he or she gets very nervous. Crusades. Like, crusades? You worry about the crusades? There's some gnarly stuff that happened in some of the crusades. There's some really good stuff that happened in the other crusades. But you want to think like our expansionist, radical, will spread democracy tendencies because we've given up on the Christ in whom all the wisdom is? You think that's really better? Like, you're going to say this is a better model than what was happening back there in the Crusades? And I would say no way.
Has America ever warred justly, in your opinion? This is now just like a matter of personal curiosity.
Ever?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay. When? Take us through like a chronological America Wars.
Oh man, I wish I could. There's actually a book that I've only made it to like the second or third chapter. But it was very interesting. The book I'm reading claimed that the American War for Independence was not just. And I was like, you better watch your mouth. Like, whoa, take it easy. Like, wow. I think the claim was use in bello. So once you're actually in war, that's that second category. They claimed, well, we fought it justly, but we shouldn't have been in it. And the claim was because we could have never won without France's help, which was very interesting. I literally don't know if that's true or not. So, but come on. But I think that one, I think that's just with what happened there. I don't think that the Civil War was just, though. I think it was the judgment of God on our nation because of the slave trade, which would be something different than slavery itself. But the trade, what was involved in that was wicked, and therefore the judgment of God. And boy, I don't know where you shake down from there. I wouldn't be the guy to ask, but I could at least say Google America and the Just War tradition for an interesting read.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that's really interesting to me here about all of this, I was preparing some of my remarks for tonight, and I was looking at some of the polling around this, and it was like the group basically in the United States that was most fervently in support of the war in Iraq was evangelicals. It was like
most support.
It was like 65% of evangelicals supported the war in Iraq. So like, what do you think happened there?
I have no clue. I read that even after, so when we enter into World War II, after Pearl Harbor, I heard that there was still significant, some article read, this is just talking to a friend. He said it was remarkable how many people were still opposed to us entering into World War II.
Interesting.
And I was like, no, you need to fact check all of that.
Yeah.
But even the idea, right, that there would be people that would be opposed.
Yeah.
I can't think of this is a just war situation. All right. So what happened in World War II, I would classify as certainly just.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges is, if you look at each one of the principles, you say, was it a legitimate authority? Was it just cause? Take Ukraine, Russia right now. Okay. Well, was it a just war for Ukraine? Okay. And I've gamed this out recently in several of the lectures I've been giving at both New St. Andrews College and in other contexts. And I'll ask people, was the war in Ukraine? I said, did Putin have just cause? And and they have to really immediately, you're going to find out a lot about a particular people, about how they're going to game out that situation. But when I ask, well, did Ukraine have just cause? Everyone's like, well, yeah. Because why? Well, you kind of like drove your tanks into our, here you are. There's a classic situation with in the Civil War in the States. There was a case where they're at some river. The North is on the north side, South on the south side. They're not warring at the moment, and they're like down across this large river, washing up. And one of the guys from the north yells across, "Hey, Johnny Reb, why do you fight?" And he says, "Because y'all down here." I get in trouble for saying that here in D.C. whether you want to. So why you fight? Well, you're down here. Well, it's the same kind of situation. Ukraine's facing no one really wants to stand up and say, yeah, I think they shouldn't have. I mean, you can try to make that case, but it's going to be a hard case to make on principles of just war.
But what's the just war case for America sending however many $1 billion at this point to Ukraine?
Mm-hmm. Right. And here's the thing. We don't have the central point that you'll find in my approach to the family, society, and foreign policy is secular humanism and some kind of post-enlightenment, just strict rationalistic thought does not have the capacity to make such decisions. You're going to make terrible decisions all the way down, right? You can't game it out without. If you read, this is from Lex Rex, Samuel Rutherford. He's actually working out why Scotland should, why we're going to send some support to the civil war that's going on in England. Why we should support, and guess what it's based on? It's related to defending the true religion and covenants that have taken place. Defending the true religion and covenants that have taken place. These are the principles that are involved in making these particular decisions. And I think it's the same way now with us in Ukraine, right? The answer would be no, we shouldn't have sent $60 billion to Ukraine. I don't think we should have sent that money. And I think even conservatives, obviously got enough conservatives move that, well, we'll somehow, maybe they'll pay it back or whatever we can figure out, or it's going to our military infrastructure and all of that stuff. And there are going to be people on the ground that I would happily grant no more details about where the money's going and exactly how it's being spent and whatnot. But I'm saying until you come back to first principles, you're not going to know how to operate in the world, who your friends should be in the world, what you're for as a person, much less what you're for as a nation.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We're going to go now to the members only section where we're going to ask. I've decided through the course of this interview that I'm going to ask Jared about whether it was right to drop the atomic bomb. He brought it up, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about him coaching football and his 7 kids and all their McDonald's food fights in the backseat of the minivan. So make sure to tune into that. You can sign up for the membership program on YouTube. You can be either a truther or a statesman. I thought you would like that. Truther is pretty funny. Okay. And make sure to sign up for that, and you get access to our episodes of Moment of Truth a day early. You get access to these cool bonus episodes. So we will go now to the members only section.
If you're listening to this, you're almost certainly a highly sophisticated news consumer, but even the most dogged of DC politicos need a news aggregator to help them out. We're big fans of Upward News here at American Moment. Ari David has actually been a previous guest on this show. We highly recommend you check out that episode. But Upward.news is a way that our team keeps in touch with all of the crazy news stories going on around the world. Your Twitter feed is not necessarily 100% reliable to get a proper cross-section of everything going on that matters. Upward News is a fantastic young media startup that is really putting together fantastic newsletters and social media content that helps people digest the news, especially if you're tired of being on the phone with your parents and explaining news stories to them multiple times a week because you're the Politico in the family. I highly recommend encouraging them to follow upward.news. They do a free 5-minute daily email that you can sign up for at readupward.com, or even better, www.ihatefakenews.com. It's time for a palate cleanse from Politicos, punch bowls, and pucks. Try Upward News today. We highly recommend it. Ari's an incredibly smart patriot, and they're a new player on the block focused on cutting through the noise and delivering smart analysis. Please check them out.
Well, Jared, thank you very much for coming on Moment of Truth, dropping some gospel truth bombs. We appreciate you coming on, and we're looking forward to this event tonight.
Me too.
Thank you for joining us once again for another episode of Moment of Truth. I am your host/co-host, Nick Solheim, the COO of American Moment. As a reminder, you can see all the cool things that we're up to at americanmoment.org. You can sign up for our membership program on YouTube. You can be either a truther or a statesman and get access, early access to the episode every week, as well as access to some bonus content that we do with every guest. So thank you for joining us once again, and we will see you next week.
Moment of Truth is an American Moment podcast taped at the Conservative Partnership Campus Studios and is produced by Jake Mercier, Jared Cummings, Tiffany Kutris, and Matthew Pearson. Our intro song is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich, and our website is americanmoment.org.